Hi everyone, I'm reading Not So Far, Love Grows, Book 3 by Renee Regent, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, Silas. With quiet finality, I closed the screen door on the front porch of my late grandfather's house. The worn wooden door no longer made the pleading, squeaking sound I had come to associate with childhood visits to this place. My cousin Levi and I had spent the past 3 weeks cleaning and making repairs to the old farmhouse, and the activity had kept my grief at bay. Now that the work was done, the dull ache of loss had returned. The sound of Levi's boots on the porch stairs announced his arrival, pulling me out of my thoughts. I turned, tossing him the key to the house. "That's the last of our chores, unless you found something worth keeping in the old barn." He caught the key in his hand and tossed it back. "Nope, just a bunch of old broken tools, not worth cleaning out when it'll likely have to be raised." He removed his straw cowboy hat, slicked back his wavy auburn hair, then replaced it on his head. "You've got to wait here for the realtor. I've already signed the papers." "Okay." I stuck the key in the pocket of my jeans. I was anxious to be away from this place, from the memories. Grandpa Vance's farm was located on the outskirts of Tilly, Georgia, a small town in the North Georgia mountains which had now become a booming tourist destination. Grandpa Vance had hung on to his property long after he lost the ability to care for it. Stubborn, yet generous to a fault, he insisted on being independent until the day he died. The pain of his passing was still fresh, causing a wave of sadness every time I saw the empty rocking chairs still gracing the wide-covered porch. I looked at Levi, and his face mirrored my thoughts. I finally said what I'd been feeling since I had heard the news about Grandpa. I wish I had seen him before he passed. It had been too many years. The neighbor who found him said he'd no idea how long Grandpa had been sitting in that old rocking chair, with his dulcimer across his lap. Ain't that just like him? Yep, sure is. At least he went peacefully, doing what he loved. While it was a sad image, it also brought to mind many summer evenings with me and Levi catching fireflies while Grandpa played his favorite old folk songs. I traced a finger over the edge of one of the chairs, which Levi was going to have to remove sooner or later. It was the realtor's idea that the chairs would make the house look more appealing, so we left them. The sound of a vehicle turning into the driveway pulled me from my sad musings. It was the realtor, Jenna Dearly, in her bright blue Jeep. Her tires crunched the gravel before coming to a stop, dust forming a cloud that settled as soon as it appeared. "Good morning, Mr. Vance and Levi," she called, closing the door of her Jeep with a hip. In her hands were a stack of envelopes and an electronic tablet. "Or maybe it's afternoon?" I moved to the edge of the top step. "Just about, and you can call me Silas." She ascended the porch, the red curls on her head bouncing as she walked. Her mouth moved continually, telling us how excited she was to get the listing. "Why, as I told Levi here the other day, everyone in the country has been eyeing this property for years. I'm certain it's going to sell quickly." She glanced out over the yard, her bright smile fading like a cloud was overhead. "Even though the house and the outbuildings do need some fixing." In truth, the house probably needed to be demolished and a new house built, but that would be up to the new owners. Both of us had inherited the property, but neither wanted to take on the project, even though Levi lived nearby. Having been in California for the past 18 years, I wasn't certain about staying in Georgia. Although recently, my life out west had fallen to new lows. A change of scenery might do me good. We sat on the porch going over the contracts. Now that I had signed, Jenna would begin showing the property. I placed the key in her plump hand and she smiled, cocking her head. "Now, Silas, do I contact you or Levi with any questions?" She glanced back and forth, waiting for one of us to speak. I pointed to my cousin, who stood leaning against the railing, looking at his phone. "You can talk with him, and if there's anything he's not sure about, he'll call me." A few minutes later, Jenna left. Levi straightened up with a stretch and a long sigh. "Well, that's that. You going back to California now?" "Maybe. I might spend a few days in Atlanta before I go." He gave me a grin that spoke volumes, but had the good sense to keep his mouth shut. We were nothing alike, except for 2 things. We looked similar, both having dark, wavy hair, green eyes, and an olive complexion. We both kept in shape and looked pretty good for our age. I had just turned 40 and Levi wasn't far behind at 38. The other thing we had in common was that trouble seemed to follow us. No matter how good our intentions were, must be the notorious Vance curse. We may have been thinking the same thing because his next words made me laugh, almost. Well, stay out of trouble, cuz, if you can. With a friendly slap on the back, he passed me and climbed into his black Chevy truck. As he pulled away, I waved, telling him to do the same, knowing full well the challenge of heeding his warning. As I walked to my rental car, I caught sight of the old barn, now a dilapidated shell of its former self. The red paint had faded to a rusty brown, and the roof was half gone, the remains hanging on as though by sheer will. It was early summer, so the kudzu vines had already begun to wrap their tendrils around the abandoned structure, claiming it. The memory the sight evoked tugged at my heart and was bittersweet. Audrey Colbank, where are you? It was strange to hear her name out loud after so many years. I leaned against the car door, images of a sultry summer afternoon invading my mind. I'd brought her here on my old Harley-Davidson motorcycle, and we had a wild time in that barn while Grandpa dozed on the porch. Afterward, she'd complained about finding hay in places one should never find hay. The memory of her was still vivid in my mind, beautiful and always impeccably dressed, even for a roll in the hay. Her face had been perfectly made up, her blonde hair shiny and styled. She was usually overdressed for the places I was able to take her. How she fell for a guy like me was still a mystery. I'm more of a beer and pizza, ripped jeans, and motorcycles kind of guy. We were so different. I grew up poor in the backwoods of Georgia, while her family was well off. I mean, mansion in Atlanta, houses all over the world, rich. I had always known our thing, whatever it was, wasn't meant to last. It was intense. It was a blast. But, in the end, nothing but a summer fling. But through all the years that followed, and despite how far apart we'd been, I couldn't forget her. The temptation to look her up had started long before I left California, but I'd resisted. No sense. She was probably married with a ton of kids by now. Even if she was single, who was I to think she'd want to see me? I wasn't much better off than when I left her. If she'd even forgive me for leaving her. She'd never understand why I had to leave, and I certainly couldn't tell her the truth. Besides, if I saw her face again, I'd have a hard time walking away. But I would have no choice but to leave, because I couldn't bear to hurt her a second time. Audrey. I closed the lid of the leather box, replacing it to the upper shelf of my closet. It was time to stop living in the past. There was no reason to fear the future. I finally had the freedom I'd desired for so long. For the first time in my life, there was no one to dictate my schedule, to tell me what to wear, or to argue with me over where we were going to eat. I was a widow, a sad status in any case, but for me, it was also empowering, which was something I hadn't confided to anyone. A year earlier, Richard and I had been on the verge of getting a divorce when he had a sudden heart attack. No one else, except my best friend Amara, knew that we had grown apart and hadn't been compatible for many years. We had maintained the facade of being the perfect couple with the perfect family, well, perfectly. To do otherwise was to let our children down, let our families down. In the process, by delaying the inevitable, we had let each other down. I straightened my spine and took a deep breath. I had spent the last 2 hours digging through boxes of old photos, letters, and other pre-internet mementos in an attempt to understand how things went so wrong between us. Richard and I had been together since high school, so it was hard to say when our troubles began. Since he died, I'd been trying to resolve my feelings of guilt and anger over our strained relationship. It was like having to go through marital counseling alone. It was a process I had to experience, a part of my grieving, though I had yet to find complete closure. I was in a much better frame of mind now that time had gone by. Learning to live on our own, just me and the kids, had been a struggle. They were grieving in their own ways, but we were all closer now as a result of our situation. I knew in my heart it was best to move on, to keep going forward. At 37, I still had many years of life ahead of me. Richard's untimely passing made me more determined to stop wasting time and find what made me truly happy. Life was too short for regrets and procrastination. I sighed, allowing the tension in my shoulders to recede. Perhaps I had been in my head too much lately, trying to sort out the past. I picked up my phone from the floor where I had tossed it and dialed the one person I could talk to about my feelings, though even she didn't know everything about my past. Amara Gabriel's voice, when she answered, was businesslike as always. "I've got 5 minutes. I'm about to leave for an appointment. What's up?" 5 minutes? That's all you can give to your bestie when she's about to have a meltdown? Okay, you got 6 then. Shoot. I sighed, a tad dramatically. I'm okay, just going through a bunch of old letters and stuff. I thought it would help, but it didn't. What were you hoping to find, Audrey? Maybe the answer to your future isn't in the past. Maybe it's something entirely new. You might be right about that, but it's not easy to face an uncertain future, you know. When I thought I was facing a divorce, at least it was a known problem. I had time to mentally and emotionally prepare for that, but Richard's death took me completely by surprise. You don't have to figure out your whole future life right now. Take it one step at a time. And you shouldn't be afraid to get out there. You're an event planner, for Christ's sakes. You are good at peopling. True, but that's work. My personal life is a different story. Excuses, babe. Maybe you need a jump start, some shock therapy, or maybe you just need to get laid. I snorted in response, inwardly giggling at the thought. I am so not ready for that. I haven't been with anyone else since before Richard and I got married. She went on a rant about me taking things too seriously, but it didn't change my mind. I knew she meant well and I loved her for it. However, I didn't have the level of confidence yet that she seemed to think I should have. Cradling the phone to my ear, I reached down to put my shoes back on. My hand touched a piece of paper and I picked it up. It was an old photo which must have fallen from one of those boxes. It was me, standing next to a rough-looking, handsome guy, one who still took my breath away at the mere thought of him. Audrey, are you listening? I really have to go now. You won't believe what I just found. What? The bracelet you've been looking for that you keep whining about losing? It was something more important than a lost bauble. No, a photo of me and Silas. The "oh" that rumbled from Amara spoke volumes, followed by another rant. That was your biggest mistake, that guy, and you know it. Yeah, it was one of those things, my crazy summer. Another part of your past, best forgotten. Listen, hun, let's go for a drink or dinner this weekend, okay? I gotta run now. Love you. Love you too. You're the best. Back at you, sweetie. Her tone had been sweet as honey, but it was wrenched to pieces by her brusque New Jersey accent. I could always count on Amara to make me smile through my tears, but I wasn't crying now. Overcome as I was by a jumble of emotions, longing, desire, anger, a whisper fell from my lips as I placed the photo back in the box. Silas Vance, where are you now? It had been a lifetime ago. Despite how the sight of him still made my body feel, my heart had never healed from the hurt of his betrayal. I had been such a fool to trust him, to believe we were meant to be together. Nothing could have been farther from the truth. He was my worst mistake, which resulted in my greatest blessing. And that was another secret I'd never tell anyone. Chapter 2. Silas. As I opened the door to my motel room, my mood went as bleak as the decor. A budget weekly stay motel on the northeast side of Atlanta was all I could currently afford. Sparsely furnished, it was at least fairly comfortable, so I couldn't complain. I threw my denim jacket on the queen-size bed and switched on the television. It droned in the background while I changed into sweats and booted up my laptop. Now that Grandpa's house was listed, there was no good reason for me to stay in Atlanta, but I was in no hurry to leave. Thinking I could look up some old friends and visit places where I used to hang out, I could do some sightseeing and check off my bucket list a few places I hadn't seen when I lived here. Or, you could be honest with yourself, dude. There was no one I wanted to see more than the woman I had tried to forget for so many years. It was the only reason I hadn't yet made arrangements to return to my crumbling life in California. But the chance that she would be glad to see me was as slim as a piece of the hay in my grandpa's barn. There wasn't much to keep me in Los Angeles either. I had grown tired of the smog, the traffic, and the cutthroat pace. Atlanta had its troubles too, but it felt like a laid-back old friend compared to the concrete jungle of Southern California.